Imagine walking past a cemetery in the United States, and realizing you're not alone. Some of the most haunted graveyards in America hide secrets that no one dares to talk about after dark. From Savannah's moss-covered tombs to Los Angeles's glowing crypts, there are places where the dead are said to walk beside the living. And tonight, we're diving into the top 5 creepiest cemeteries at night. Where shadows don't just move, they follow. But here's the question: what happens when the fold between life and death finally breaks? If you want to uncover the chilling truth and feel every moment of this terrifying journey, stay with me till the very end. And if you love exploring stories that twist your imagination and keep you awake at night, hit subscribe right now. And don't forget to drop a comment with which cemetery you'd dare to visit, or never step foot in. The wind whispers differently in cemeteries after midnight, carrying with it the weight of stories that never fully ended, and if you listen closely, it almost feels like the silence itself is breathing. America hides secrets in its soil, and some places refuse to let go of their ghosts, places so heavy with memory that even the living hesitate to step inside once the sun sets. 5 cemeteries, scattered across the United States, each with its own shadow, each with a tale so unsettling that even the bravest visitors rarely stay long enough to hear the full story. The first lies in New Orleans, the famous St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, where narrow paths wind between crumbling mausoleums, their walls streaked with time and humidity. Locals whisper about the voodoo queen, Marie Laveau, whose spirit is said to walk those narrow aisles, her shadow moving just beyond the candlelight of late-night offerings. If you dare to knock on her tomb 3 times, they say you'll feel the warmth of her hand press back from the stone. But some have claimed when they looked down, it wasn't their shadow on the wall, it was hers. Far north, in Boston, lies the Granary burying ground, tucked between city streets buzzing with nightlife and neon signs. But step inside those gates after midnight and the sound of the city fades, replaced by the crunch of leaves and the faint echo of voices. Children who never lived past infancy are said to cry there, their graves marked with tiny stones. Some visitors swear they've felt a small hand slip into theirs, leading them deeper into the rows until the sound of footsteps no longer matches the number of people walking. In the Midwest, Bachelor's Grove Cemetery in Illinois sits abandoned, its iron gates twisted with rust and vines. Drivers along the nearby road report a phantom farmhouse appearing in the woods, glowing with a light that disappears the closer you walk. But the most terrifying account comes from those who've wandered too far among the toppled stones. They speak of a woman in white, her face blurred as though the night itself refuses to remember her, cradling a child that is never there when you blink again. Some insist she follows them to their cars, her reflection lingering in the rearview mirror long after they've left. On the West Coast, Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles is known for its celebrity graves, but the nights hold a different audience. Security guards talk of voices rising from empty mausoleums, songs from actors long forgotten echoing under the glow of the Hollywood sign. The sound is soft, like a radio tuned to a lost frequency, pulling you toward the oldest part of the grounds. If you follow it too far, the music cuts, and for a moment, you're sure someone is standing right behind you. But the one cemetery that binds them all with a fear so sharp it feels alive is deep in Savannah, Georgia, Bonaventure Cemetery, draped in Spanish moss that sways like curtains hiding something behind them. Tourists come for the beauty, but locals refuse to linger. They tell of a little girl named Gracie, frozen in stone, her marble eyes seeming to follow you as you pass. Offer her a toy and you might hear her laughter in the distance, but take it back and they say you'll dream of her face, pale and gray, standing at the foot of your bed. Each of these cemeteries carries a question no one has answered: are the voices real, or is it just the mind turning silence into ghosts? But if you walk among them alone, with nothing but the sound of your own breath, you may start to wonder whether the dead really stay where they're buried, or if they've been waiting for someone exactly like you to listen. And it's in that pause, when your heart beats louder than the night itself, that you realize you're no longer sure where the path ends. At St. Louis Cemetery, some tourists claim they've seen chalk marks appear on the tombs without anyone touching them, symbols drawn in shaky lines that vanish by morning. Police chalk it up to vandals, but the locals shake their heads, because the marks glow faintly in the dark, like something written from the inside. In Boston's Granary, a security guard once told of hearing the shuffle of boots on cobblestones, steady and purposeful, the kind of march that belongs to soldiers. Yet when he turned, there was only a row of graves belonging to men from the Revolution. He left that night and never came back, swearing the sound followed him all the way to his car. Bachelor's Grove has its own story that refuses to fade, the black dog. Drivers have swerved to avoid it, headlights flashing on a massive shadow darting across the road. But when the tires skid and the car stops, there's nothing. Some say if you look into the woods after, you'll see two eyes glowing, not yellow like an animal's, but a pale, human white. Hollywood forever hides something even stranger. A caretaker once locked the gates at midnight, certain everyone had left, only to hear applause ripple from the outdoor theater where no film was playing. He swore he saw the faint silhouettes of an audience seated in the moonlight, clapping for a performance long since ended. By the time he unlocked the gates again, the seats were empty, the air heavy with the smell of cigar smoke. In Bonaventure, locals still tell the story of a man who stayed past dusk, determined to prove the legends were only stories. He placed a toy car at Gracie's grave, mocking the tales. Hours later, his friends found him wandering outside the gates, the toy melted in his hand, his voice broken as he whispered the same thing over and over, "She wouldn't stop asking me to play." The question lingers like a chill in the air: what happens when you listen too closely, when you let the silence of these places seep into you? Because every cemetery holds names, dates, and carved epitaphs. But in these 5, it feels as if the ground itself refuses to forget, and maybe, just maybe, it doesn't want you to leave. And once that thought digs in, it doesn't let go, because the pull feels almost familiar, like you've walked these paths before, like some part of you already belongs to the ground beneath your feet. At St. Louis, tourists have vanished without explanation, their tours ending mid-sentence as if the city simply swallowed them whole. A guide once told of a man who wandered off for just a moment. When they searched, his footprints stopped in the middle of a damp path, no sign of him on either side, as though he'd stepped straight into the earth itself. Granary's stories grow darker the longer you dig. Records mention caretakers who left notes about seeing entire groups of mourners, dressed in old colonial clothing, standing silently in the rows. But when the caretaker called out, the group turned in perfect unison, their eyes dark and hollow, before fading like smoke. The caretaker's diary ends there, he never wrote another word. Bachelor's Grove refuses to stay quiet. Paranormal investigators bring cameras, yet every photograph carries a stranger, a woman in Victorian clothing, sitting on a crumbling stone, her expression vacant but fixed on the lens. Even when the stone is gone, toppled years before, the image remains. No one can explain how the same woman appears in photographs taken decades apart, unchanged, unaged, waiting. Hollywood forever whispers in dreams. Actors who've performed there speak of strange visions after late-night rehearsals, waking to applause echoing through their apartments, cigar smoke curling under their doors. Some swear they've seen old Hollywood faces at the edge of their bed, watching silently, as though deciding whether or not to let them sleep again. In Bonaventure, its weight presses hardest of all. Locals warn of staying past midnight not because of Gracie alone, but because of what comes after her laughter. Visitors describe the moss swaying even when the air is still, branches bending toward them like arms. Some recall seeing entire processions of the dead moving down the path, candlelight flickering, each face locked in a stare that feels too aware. A tourist once followed the procession, convinced it was part of a tour. By dawn, all that remained of him was his jacket, folded neatly on Gracie's lap. 5 cemeteries. 5 places tied together not just by death, but by something far less willing to rest. And maybe that's the secret, these cemeteries aren't haunted because of who was buried there. They're haunted because of who is still waiting, searching, reaching for anyone who dares to step too close. And the truth that gnaws at you, the truth no one wants to say out loud, is that maybe the dead don't reach out to scare you at all. Maybe they reach out because they need you. At St. Louis, the chants near Marie Laveau's tomb have been caught faintly on tape, words no scholar has been able to translate. But some claim, when slowed down, the voices sound less like curses and more like pleas, names being called, names that don't belong to anyone on record. Names of people still alive. Granary's shadows grow stranger still. A college student once documented nights spent inside, determined to debunk the legends. His footage shows him joking at first, laughing as he panned across headstones. But the final video ends with him staring directly into the camera, whispering a single sentence, "They keep asking me to stay." He was never seen again. Bachelor's Grove pulls at the weak spots in memory. Visitors report losing hours, convinced they were only there for minutes. One woman told reporters she remembered sitting by the pond, listening to the water ripple, only to wake up at home with mud on her clothes, her shoes soaked, and her phone filled with hundreds of photos, each one of her sleeping, taken from just a few feet away. Hollywood Forever's glamour shatters in the deepest hours of night. Stage lights flare inside locked auditoriums, casting long shadows across empty rows. But security guards claim the shadows don't match the chairs, they move differently, swaying like figures standing where no figures should be. One guard quit after describing a shadow leaning close enough to whisper his own name in his ear. And Bonaventure, always the final note, holds the heaviest silence. Gracie is only the beginning. Beneath the moss and crooked angels, locals speak of a crypt sealed centuries ago, one whose lock is rusted shut. But on the stillest nights, the iron rattles, slow and steady, like a hand testing the door from the inside. Those who have lingered long enough say the rattling always stops the moment you notice it. And then you hear footsteps, not behind you, but beside you, keeping pace as if something has finally stepped free. 5 cemeteries. 5 warnings written in stone. And the longer you think about them, the harder it is to shake the feeling that maybe the reason these stories keep repeating isn't because people keep imagining them, but because someone is still trying to be heard, still waiting for you to answer. And when you finally let that thought settle, the air around you feels heavier, as though the silence itself is listening. In St. Louis, there's an old belief whispered among locals, that if Marie Laveau calls your name, you must answer, or she will follow you home. More than one visitor has claimed to wake in the middle of the night, the smell of roses and smoke curling through their room, their name spoken softly in the dark. Granary has its own way of marking you. Tourists who've touched certain headstones have reported strange burns on their skin, thin red lines shaped like letters that don't fade quickly. Some vanish in hours, others remain for weeks. A historian once traced the marks left on his arm and realized they matched the name of a child buried there 2 centuries earlier. Bachelor's Grove lingers in photographs, but it's more than that, it lingers in people. A local man confessed that after visiting the cemetery, he began to dream of water every night. Calm at first, then darker, until he saw the reflection of that faceless woman standing on the shore. He stopped sleeping altogether. His family said he disappeared one morning, and the only clue was his boots left neatly by the pond. Hollywood Forever keeps its secrets in sound. Bands that have played their tell of music carrying on after they've stopped, faint echoes of their own songs drifting from the stage long into the night. One singer described hearing her own voice days later, on a road miles away, humming through the radio of a car that wasn't hers. The driver never looked at her, but in the reflection of the window, she swore she saw his mouth moving, singing along in perfect time. And Bonaventure, its moss and marble hide something deeper. A group of students once dared each other to spend the night there, camping near the graves. By morning, only 3 of the 5 remained. The other 2 were found wandering the streets of Savannah at sunrise, barefoot and dazed, their lips whispering the same phrase again and again. She opened the door. 5 cemeteries, scattered across the United States. 5 places where the line between the living and the dead grows thin enough to hear what shouldn't be heard, to see what shouldn't be seen. And if all of them are calling, New Orleans, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, Savannah, what happens when someone finally listens long enough to answer all of them at once? What if that's the very reason the stories never end, because someone always gets close, but no one has ever stayed long enough to complete the call? In St. Louis, a priest once warned that the chanting at Marie Laveau's tomb is not meant to frighten, but to summon. He claimed each voice adds to a circle, and when the circle is whole, the dead will no longer wait quietly in their graves. His journal stopped mid-sentence, the ink smeared as though the page had been torn from his hand. Granary holds its own unanswered invitation. Some nights, the gates have been found standing wide open at dawn, though the locks remain unbroken. Neighbors swear they hear the toll of a bell at 3 a.m., but there hasn't been a working bell in the burying ground for over a century. Whatever is ringing, it's calling someone, and the sound always points inward, never outward. Bachelor's Grove hides a shadow older than its graves. Investigators once tried to map the area, charting each stone and path, but their compasses spun wildly, as if the ground itself was rejecting them. Hours later, they realized the map they had drawn did not match the cemetery at all. It matched something else, a layout of rows and circles that seemed more like an invitation than a record. Hollywood forever doesn't just echo, it lures. Archivists say that reels of film stored in vaults on the grounds sometimes play themselves at night. When checked in the morning, the reels are blank, except for one. A single frame of a face pressed close to the camera, eyes wide, mouth open, as if screaming silently. The face has never been identified. And Bonaventure, draped in moss and shadow, may be the key that binds them all. Locals speak of a path that doesn't appear on any map, a crooked road that bends in on itself until it delivers you back to where you began. But those who've walked it swear something changes each time. A name added to a headstone. A statue turns slightly to face a new direction. A voice whispering closer, closer, until it sounds like it's coming from your own chest. 5 cemeteries, 5 threads of the same tapestry, stretched across the country. And if those threads ever weave together, if someone follows each voice, each shadow, each call to its end, then maybe the silence between the graves won't be silence anymore. Maybe it will be a chorus, rising all at once, coast to coast, the kind of sound that doesn't just echo in the air but digs into your bones until you can't tell if it's inside you or outside. At St. Louis, the circle of chants has grown louder in recent years. Tour guides say more visitors complain of dizziness, of hearing words they can't repeat but somehow understand. A few have collapsed at the gates, waking with dirt under their fingernails, whispering promises they don't remember making. Granary has begun showing signs too. Caretakers have found new stones etched into the ground, names no one recognizes, dates that haven't happened yet. And when they try to clear them away, the carvings return by morning, deeper, sharper, as though someone is writing the future into the soil itself. Bachelor's Grove pulls in the restless. Paranormal hunters go missing for hours, reappearing with mud in their mouths, speaking in voices that aren't their own. One man brought back an old coin he swore he dug from the pond, stamped with the year 2045. No one could explain the minting, or the way the coin was still warm to the touch. Hollywood forever seems to bleed into the city beyond its walls. Apartment windows nearby flicker with light at midnight, showing brief images of old films across curtains. Residents report waking to find their televisions glowing with static, faint figures moving in the haze, mouthing words that sync perfectly with their dreams. And Bonaventure, its lock has begun to rattle more often. Locals say the sound is louder now, like a heartbeat trapped behind iron. Travelers who pass at night describe feeling a vibration in the ground, low and steady, as though something buried deep is straining to rise. A priest once pressed his ear to the crypt and claimed he didn't hear voices, he heard breathing. 5 cemeteries. 5 warnings. 5 voices growing stronger. And if the dead aren't just haunting these places, if they're reaching, calling, writing names not yet carved in stone, then maybe they're not waiting for you to visit at all. Maybe they're already on their way. Because once you start to wonder if they're moving toward us, the world outside those gates doesn't feel safe anymore. In New Orleans, neighbors of St. Louis Cemetery whisper of figures drifting down Basin Street long after midnight, tall, silent shapes that vanish when headlights touch them. A woman living across the way swore she woke to find wet footprints on her porch, leading straight to her door, though it hadn't rained for days. Boston's Granary has begun leaking into the streets too. Tourists wandering the Freedom Trail at night report hearing the shuffle of boots and the rattle of muskets, but when they turn, it's not actors in costume, it's empty streets. Yet the smell of gunpowder lingers in the air, sharp enough to sting their eyes. Chicago's Bachelor's Grove has left its imprint on the living in stranger ways. Families driving past late at night sometimes find their radios hijacked, voices whispering through static, speaking words that sound like prayers in languages no one recognizes. Once, a man called police claiming a house had appeared in the forest, glowing with light. When authorities arrived, there was nothing but an open clearing, the grass still pressed flat as if something heavy had been sitting there. Los Angeles near Hollywood forever hasn't been quiet either. Studio workers in nearby lots describe seeing shadows moving across sound stages after closing, silhouettes of dancers gliding across walls when the lights are off. And every so often, someone walking down Santa Monica Boulevard hears faint applause, rolling like thunder, though there's no one around to clap. But Savannah. Savannah is changing. Bonaventure's gates have been found ajar in the mornings, though they've been locked tight at dusk. The moss-draped oaks outside the cemetery now sway when there's no wind, bending toward passing cars. Locals whisper that Gracie's statue sometimes appears damp in the mornings, as though she's been crying. And a few have woken to find children's toys placed neatly on their porches, toys they never owned. 5 cemeteries. 5 signals. 5 pieces of something larger. And if they're no longer contained within their iron gates, if the dead have already begun to step past the boundaries we thought were safe, then the real question isn't what waits for you inside those cemeteries. It's what happens when those cemeteries come looking for you. And that's when the thought sharpens into something colder than fear, because cemeteries don't move, yet somehow their presence spreads, mile by mile, like roots under the ground searching for what they've been missing. In New Orleans, entire blocks near St. Louis report flickering lights at the same time each night, 3:07 a.m. sharp. Some call it a power surge, but utility companies deny it. A man once filmed his lamps glowing bright white, brighter than any bulb could burn, until they shattered in unison. On the playback, faint figures could be seen reflected in the shards, faces pressed close, mouths open wide. Boston's Granary leaves colder traces. Commuters passing the graveyard early in the morning find frost clinging to the iron gates, even in July. One delivery driver swore the frost formed words, a sentence too quick to photograph before it faded. He never repeated exactly what he read, but he quit his job that day and left the city before nightfall. Chicago feels its strongest near Bachelor's Grove. Entire neighborhoods around the forest have reported hearing the toll of a church bell that no longer exists. Families claim photographs on their walls fall during the night, always the same one first, the oldest relatives, the ones already buried. And then the younger portraits follow, frame by frame, until the walls are bare. Los Angeles isn't immune either. Near Hollywood forever, old theaters have reported projectors running without reels, glowing squares of light flickering on the curtains. Neighbors say the streets outside fill with the sound of footsteps, a parade of invisible figures moving together toward the cemetery gates. One night, the sound stopped all at once, and every dog in the neighborhood began to howl. But it's Savannah where the air grows thickest. Bonaventure's moss drips heavier, damp with a mist that doesn't burn off with the sun. Travelers have begun avoiding the area, swearing the road bends longer than it should, that the walk to the gates takes hours though the distance hasn't changed. And in some homes, families wake to find their mirrors fogged from the inside, children's handprints pressed into the glass. 5 cemeteries. 5 voices calling, not just from within, but outward, into towns, into homes, into dreams. And if their reach has already begun to spread this far, if they can find you even before you set foot through their gates, how much longer before the dead stop waiting for nightfall at all? And once that question takes root, every sound around you feels different, every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind through the trees, every knock at the door that comes when no one should be there. In New Orleans, neighbors of St. Louis claim the chants now slip into their sleep. Entire families wake at the same moment, repeating the same strange words and voices that don't sound like their own. Some refuse to speak of it, fearing that even acknowledging the language might bind them tighter to whoever is calling. Boston's Granary grows bolder. Office workers nearby have reported seeing shadows of children in the reflections of their windows, darting past desks when no one is there. One woman fainted after hearing a laugh right behind her ear. Security cameras confirmed the sound, though no one stood near her. Chicago feels Bachelor's Grove in its bones. Commuters crossing Midlothian Turnpike late at night describe headlights dimming as if swallowed by fog, and then the sudden appearance of figures along the roadside, pale, blurred, some carrying lanterns that burn blue. Drivers who stop often find their engines dead, their cell phones drained, their watches frozen at the exact minute the figures appeared. Los Angeles cannot bury its ghosts. Around Hollywood forever, people say their televisions turn on by themselves at midnight, always to a blank channel filled with static. But the static hums, rising and falling like breath, until it steadies into the rhythm of a heartbeat. Some swear the sound matches their own, syncing perfectly until the screen goes dark. And Savannah is different now. Bonaventure's reach stretches beyond its gates. A group of visitors walked the rows at dusk and later swore they saw the moss itself twist, curling into shapes of letters, words half-formed, as if the trees were trying to write. Others say they've woken to find the same words scrawled in dirt across their doorsteps, written in a hand that wasn't theirs. 5 cemeteries. 5 signals, stronger now, no longer waiting for the brave to wander in. And if the dead are learning how to step closer, how to whisper louder, how to cross from stone and soil into walls and mirrors, then maybe the real fear isn't being buried in one of these places. Maybe the real fear is realizing you already carry a piece of them with you. Because once you start to feel that weight, once you start to wonder if the silence inside you isn't silence at all but something waiting, every moment alone feels crowded. In New Orleans, entire apartment complexes near St. Louis have begun filing noise complaints with no source. Tenants hear footsteps pacing their ceilings at night, heavy, deliberate, like someone walking in boots through water. Maintenance checks every room. Every floor is empty. And yet, every night, the pacing returns, always stopping right above the bed. Boston's Granary is slipping into the breath of the city. On windy days, tourists say the air carries whispers. Some swear they hear full names called, first and last, names that belong to no one in their group. A few hear their own names. Those who do rarely return. Chicago's Bachelor's Grove no longer hides in shadow. Now, people passing the woods in daylight report seeing flickers of light between the trees, like lanterns swaying in a procession. Once, a school bus driver stopped to watch. The lights grew closer. When he blinked, he found every child on the bus staring out the same window, eyes wide, unmoving, their fingers pointing toward the forest. Hollywood forever is no longer just a resting place. The walkways leading in have begun to shift. Visitors swear the gravel crunches beneath their feet in patterns, like footsteps echoing theirs but a second behind. One woman recorded herself walking at sunset. On playback, there were 2 sets of footsteps. Hers, and another that stopped every time she stopped, then whispered her full name in a voice that matched her dead grandmother's. And Bonaventure, always the quiet one, now feels like it's breathing. The moss on the statues ripples without wind. People say the air thickens as if you're walking underwater. Locals claim that some graves have begun to hum, low and deep, a sound you feel in your chest more than hear in your ears. A musician once pressed his ear to one of the stones and stood frozen for 10 full minutes, tears streaming down his face. When asked what he heard, he simply said, "My mother's lullaby. She's been gone 30 years. 5 cemeteries. 5 signals now living inside the air we breathe, the roads we drive, the walls we sleep beside. And if they've already reached this far, if their whispers are already in your home, their footprints already pacing your floor, then maybe they're not just haunting places anymore. Maybe they're haunting people. The nights feel heavier now, as though the darkness itself has grown teeth, and every quiet space carries an echo you don't remember leaving behind. In New Orleans, near St. Louis Cemetery, families wake to the sound of chanting, their lips moving before their eyes even open. Some record themselves and play it back in horror, because the words spoken aren't English, aren't even languages they know. Yet their voices chant in unison, calling names that don't belong to anyone in their bloodline. Boston's Granary creeps into the rhythm of the city. Businessmen walking past on their morning commutes have sworn they heard the clink of colonial muskets at their heels, the rattle of bayonets, the march of boots in time with their steps. Some quicken their pace. Some stop. But the march never stops. The sound follows until they've crossed completely out of sight of the gates. Chicago's Bachelor's Grove leaks into daylight with a hunger that feels deliberate. Couples driving by in the afternoon claim to see a woman in white standing by the pond, her back turned, rocking something in her arms. Always the same rhythm, as if she's cradling a child. Yet when anyone approaches, the pond ripples violently, the reflection twisting into faces not standing on the bank, but watching from beneath the water. Hollywood forever grows restless in Los Angeles. The graves are filled with actors, but the performances continue long after midnight. Pedestrians on Santa Monica Boulevard swear they hear entire audiences applauding inside the cemetery, though the grounds are closed. The strange part isn't the sound, it's the way it carries, stretching blocks into the city until even strangers walking alone at night find themselves clapping without meaning to, their palms stinging with every strike. In Bonaventure and Savannah, it no longer whispers. Now it speaks. Travelers walking the paths have heard voices call from behind them, soft and pleading, "Don't leave me here." When they turn, the path is empty, but the plea grows louder, closer, as if the voice has slipped inside their own throat. More than one visitor has left shaking, unable to speak for days, their vocal cords bruised from words they never said aloud. 5 cemeteries. 5 warnings stretched across America's map. And if their shadows already slip through streets, mirrors, water, and voices, if their reach is already this close, then maybe it was never about the graves at all. Maybe it was always about finding their way back to you. Because once that thought crawls in, you can't escape it, the feeling that every whisper in the dark is not just around you, but for you. In New Orleans, the shadows near St. Louis no longer wait by the gates. Residents describe hearing knocks on their windows at the same hour every night, always 3 times. One man finally pulled his curtains aside and saw a handprint pressed against the glass from the outside, except the print was his own, down to the scar on his palm. Boston's Granary carries its echo into offices and apartments nearby. Workers late at night say the scratching of quills can be heard across desks, the steady scrape of ink on parchment. But when they search, the paper is blank, until hours later, when faint words begin to appear on their own. Names. Dates. Sometimes the day ahead. Chicago's Bachelor's Grove bends time in ways no one can explain. Drivers swear the road beside the woods stretches longer, the turns repeating, the same tree flashing past the headlights again and again. Some exit the loop shaken and pale, claiming they saw themselves walking among the headstones as they passed. Hollywood forever clings to its stages. Residents near the cemetery report old film reels flickering across their walls, even with no projector, black and white faces mouthing lines they don't recognize. Once, a man paused to watch, and the actor on the wall stopped mid-sentence, turned his head, and looked directly at him. In Bonaventure. Bonaventure grows heavier every night. Tourists who visit say the very air inside the gates feels like it's pressing down, like someone's hand is resting on their chest. A girl once fainted there, and when her friends carried her out, they noticed the outline of tiny fingers around her throat, like a child had tried to hold her in place. 5 cemeteries. 5 signals bleeding outward, no longer bound by fences or gates. And if they can cross distance, if they can touch your windows, your papers, your walls, your breath, then maybe they don't need you to come to them anymore. Maybe they've already found the way to come to you. And when that realization settles in, the world around you stops feeling like your own, your home, your street, even your body begins to feel borrowed. In New Orleans, some claim St. Louis has begun choosing people. Locals say they've seen neighbors walking the alleys at night, barefooted, eyes blank, drifting toward the cemetery without speaking a word. When stopped, they resist violently, whispering through clenched teeth, "She's calling me back." By morning, they remember nothing, except the dirt still stuck between their toes. Boston's Granary threads itself into bloodlines. Families who have lived near the grounds for generations describe children waking with old scars etched across their skin, shapes resembling quills, muskets, or initials carved centuries ago. Doctors have no explanation. One father swears he watched a fresh mark bloom across his daughter's arm in real time, letters spelling out a name she had never heard before. Chicago's Bachelor's Grove is no longer silent. Late-night joggers in the area say they hear voices chanting low, rhythmic words rising from the woods. When they record it, the tape plays back nothing but silence, until the last second, when a single word cuts through, a command. Stay. Those who've heard it find themselves drawn back days later, against their will, as though their own body betrays them. Hollywood Forever's echoes have slipped into dreams. Actors and musicians in Los Angeles describe visions of performing under pale lights, to an audience they cannot see. The applause grows louder, deafening, until the dreamer bows without meaning to. Some wake with sore throats as if they'd been singing all night. Some wake with lipstick prints on their collars, though no one had kissed them. And Bonaventure. Bonaventure is no longer patient. Visitors report statues turning as they pass, the stone heads angling slightly, just enough to notice from the corner of the eye. A traveler once swore Gracie's marble lips had parted, just faintly, like she was about to speak. He left the grounds running, but days later, he awoke to the sound of a child's giggle inside his bedroom. 5 cemeteries. 5 voices no longer bound by death, no longer bound by place. And if they can step into your dreams, mark your skin, guide your body without your consent, then maybe they aren't just looking for someone to haunt. Maybe they're looking for someone to join them. And the truth is, you don't get to choose when that step happens. In New Orleans, a bartender closing up after midnight reported the lights flickering 3 times, always 3, before every bottle on the shelf rattled in unison. He thought it was an earthquake until he turned and saw muddy footprints across the floor, leading straight into the locked storage room. When he opened it, the room was empty, except for a fresh bouquet of funeral lilies lying on the table. Boston's Granary has become a place people cross the street to avoid, even in broad daylight. Yet no one can explain why phones shut down when pointed toward the cemetery, or why digital clocks nearby always freeze at the same time. 3:17 a.m. Survivors of late-night encounters claim that's the exact moment the graves begin to breathe, a steady, rising and falling motion, as if the ground itself is alive. Chicago's Bachelor's Grove no longer hides in shadows. Drivers along the Midlothian Turnpike tell of headlights bending, beams twisting as though the road itself is folding inward. Dashcams have captured pale figures darting between trees, though no 2 cameras ever record the same figure. And every driver swears they hear it, just under the hum of the engine, a voice whispering their own name, syllable by syllable, from the back seat. Hollywood Forever grows bolder each season. Concertgoers at the Hollywood Bowl, just a short walk away, have reported hearing faint applause before the music even begins. Security teams sweep the grounds, but when the crowd cheers, the echoes from the cemetery always answer back, louder, longer, as though the dead are demanding an encore. And Bonaventure has started to follow people home. Guests who pass through claim weeks later their houses fill with the sound of dripping water, though no pipe leaks, no faucet runs. The sound grows louder each night until finally, someone notices the carpets are damp. Beneath the wet fibers, when torn open, lies soil. Cold, black, cemetery soil. 5 cemeteries. 5 currents pulling closer, faster, stronger. And if their reach has already spread past the gates, into streets, into homes, into the rhythm of daily life, then the question is no longer if they'll find you. It's only when. Because when they do, it won't look like the movies. There won't be thunder cracking or a chorus of screams. It will come quiet, like a door left ajar, like a voice calling from the next room, like the faint shuffle of feet across your floor when you know you live alone. In New Orleans, the latest stories say you don't have to step foot in St. Louis No. 1 anymore. All it takes is speaking the name of someone buried there out loud, even by accident. Locals say the air changes instantly, heavier, tighter, like someone pressing on your chest. And then the dreams begin, dreams of standing in narrow alleys lit by candlelight, your own shadow stretching ahead of you, guiding you toward the gates. In Boston, the Granary is said to send invitations now. Envelopes slid under doors, sealed with wax, each bearing a single date and time. No one dares open them, but everyone who receives one vanishes the night before. The letters are always gone by morning, as though they were never there at all. Chicago's Bachelor's Grove has grown restless with time. Hunters in the woods nearby claim they hear footsteps keeping pace with them, always just behind, never breaking rhythm. If they turn suddenly, they catch only the last flicker of movement, a hat brim, the edge of a black coat, slipping behind a tree. And no matter how far they walk, they always end up back at the same clearing, staring at the same crooked headstone. In Hollywood, actors whisper that if you rehearse too long past midnight, you'll start hearing someone else repeat your lines. Not an echo, another voice entirely. It knows every word, every pause, every intonation, and if you let it go on long enough, the voice grows louder than your own until you can't tell which mouth it's coming from. And in Bonaventure, the stories have taken a darker turn. Travelers who bring flowers to Gracie's grave say she follows them now, appearing in reflections, in photographs, in windows late at night. A child's face, pale and smiling, pressed against the glass. Some claim she doesn't just watch, she asks questions in a sing-song whisper. And if you answer, even once, she doesn't stop coming back. 5 cemeteries. 5 beginnings. And when the beginnings overlap, when the voices call at the same time, when the invitations arrive on the same night, no one knows what happens next. Some say that's the moment the map folds. That these cemeteries, scattered across the country, stop being separate places. Roads bend, skies thin, distances collapse, until Boston, Chicago, Savannah, New Orleans, and Los Angeles are no longer dots on opposite coasts but corners of the same room. In New Orleans, a tour guide swears she watched the walls of the crypts ripple like water, and when she blinked, she was staring at a row of palm trees that didn't belong there. She had never been to California, yet she recognized the skyline beyond, Los Angeles, shimmering faintly, as if glimpsed through glass. In Boston, a college student walking home past the Granary claims he passed a row of stones etched not with Puritan names but Spanish words, adorned with roses. When he looked again, the letters were gone, but he could still smell candle wax, still hear faint mariachi horns carried on the air, the ghost of a Hollywood funeral that never should have touched New England soil. In Chicago, truckers resting by the Midlothian Turnpike described seeing a single lantern swinging between the trees, yet the forest around them wasn't Illinois at all. The trees dripped with moss, and the earth under their boots was soft and wet. They had never been to Savannah, but the swamp smell, the heavy southern air, was unmistakable. Hollywood Forever's night guards tell of new shadows walking the lot, men in tricorn hats, women in long colonial dresses, soldiers carrying muskets. Visitors laugh at actors until they realize the costumes are faded, mud-stained, their faces too pale, their eyes too hollow. And Bonaventure itself. Some swear it has started to hum. A low vibration that makes teeth ache, bones shudder, a sound that is less a noise than a pressure, pulling everything closer, pulling all 5 together. And if that hum ever reaches its peak, no one is certain whether the world will split open or fold shut. Some theorists say the fold has already begun. Look at the reports side by side, and the pattern is there. Travelers swear they've lost time, an hour vanished from the dashboard clock, a whole night gone from the calendar. Families in Savannah waking to find fresh Chicago snow on their porches. A diner in Los Angeles serving a couple who paid in worn Confederate bills, their hands shaking as though they had just crossed a war zone. The news doesn't print these things. Too scattered, too impossible. But the people who've seen it, truckers, bartenders, students, groundskeepers, they know. They talk in hushed tones on late-night radio, call-in shows that fade into static once the subject turns to cemeteries. One caller from Boston described walking home after midnight and hearing jazz music drifting through the streets. Not the faint strains of a bar, but a full brass band, loud, alive, coming from the Granary burial ground. He followed it until he saw the gates, and the music stopped. What chilled him most wasn't the silence, it was the single feather lying at his feet, white and dusted with ash, though no bird had flown overhead. A trucker outside Chicago swears the same week, he parked near Bachelor's Grove and heard boots crunching leaves in perfect rhythm with his own. He turned, heart pounding, and froze. It wasn't one figure, it was 5, side by side, each in clothing from a different century. Colonial, Civil War, Victorian, flapper, modern black suit. all walking together, eyes fixed on him. And in New Orleans, a woman passing St. Louis number 1 late at night claimed she saw the same group, 5 figures, standing at the gates. Not looking at her, but looking past her, as though waiting for someone else. They're moving now. They're not just tied to the cemeteries anymore. The question no one dares ask out loud. If they find each other, if all 5 step into the same place, into the same night, what happens then? Some whisper that when the 5 finally meet, it won't be at a cemetery at all. It will be somewhere ordinary, somewhere no one expects. A gas station on the edge of a highway. A quiet diner in the middle of the night. A rest stop where the only sound is vending machines humming in the dark. One man in Savannah swears he saw them already. Said he pulled over for gas just after 2 in the morning. The station was empty, except for 5 people standing beneath the flickering lights. They didn't move. They didn't speak. Their faces were pale, their eyes dark, their clothes out of place with each other, as if each had stepped straight out of a different century. He blinked, and they were gone, but the pump had kept running, spilling gasoline across the concrete. In Los Angeles, a waitress closing up a diner off Melrose claimed a group of 5 came in just before she locked the doors. No words, just sat in a booth together, staring at nothing. When she turned to grab menus, the booth was empty again. Only thing left was condensation on the window, 5 perfect handprints pressed against the glass. In Chicago, a cop on patrol reported a traffic camera glitching near the cemetery. When he pulled the footage later, he saw the images stutter, frames repeating, streets warping. For a single frozen second, 5 figures stood in the middle of the road, their shadows stretching impossibly long in every direction, like the streets themselves bent around them. Now people wonder if the fold isn't just pulling places together. Maybe it's pulling time itself. Different eras bleeding into each other. Different histories stacking in the same breath. And if the fold keeps tightening, maybe the next time those 5 appear, it won't just be for a second. Maybe they'll stay. Some already believe they have. Not in full form, not yet, but in fragments. A tourist in Boston fainted at the Granary when she saw her husband's name freshly carved into a headstone that was supposed to be centuries old. When she came to, the stone was blank again, but she swore she felt cold fingers brush her wrist, tracing the pulse like someone memorizing it. In New Orleans, a street musician played late by the cemetery gates. He said his trumpet began to play notes he didn't blow, melodies twisting on their own, weaving into something ancient and sorrowful. When he lowered the horn, his fingers were bleeding, and 5 faint silhouettes leaned against the crypts, swaying gently with the music. A delivery driver near Los Angeles took a wrong turn and ended up circling Hollywood forever. He snapped a picture to prove how lost he was. Later, when he checked his phone, the photo showed not the cemetery but a foggy marsh with Spanish moss hanging low, Savannah. And in the foreground, a group of 5 figures, blurred but standing closer than he remembered. Some claim the figures don't just appear anymore. They follow. A student in Chicago left campus late, walking home under the streetlights. She glanced over her shoulder and saw nothing. But every block she passed, she heard footsteps behind her, 5 sets, evenly spaced, never hurrying, never stopping. When she reached her apartment, the doorman asked if her friends wanted to come inside too. She had walked home alone. And now, the stories are spreading beyond the cities, beyond the cemeteries. The fold is widening. And the 5. They are learning how to cross. The 5 are no longer scattered pieces of rumor. In every corner of the country, from Savannah's moss-draped graves to Los Angeles's glowing skyline, people feel the same invisible weight in the air, a heaviness that bends time and place into something unrecognizable. It's not just cemeteries now. It's not just midnight. A father driving his kids to school at dawn swears the radio cut into static, then a funeral hymn he'd never heard before, the voices layered, 5 deep. A woman walking her dog in Chicago at sunset saw their shadows stretch across the sidewalk even though no one stood there. In Boston, a tourist snapped a photo of the Freedom Trail, only to see 5 blurred figures standing hand in hand in the middle of the crowd, none of them facing the camera. Each story is dismissed. A glitch, a trick of the light, a tired mind. But together, they weave a truth people don't want to say out loud. The fold is already pulled too tight. The five are no longer waiting. They are no longer searching. They are here. And the question left hanging in the silence. If the dead can walk beside the living without us knowing, how many times have you already passed them, and never realized?